Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us here today. My name is Adam Lieblick, and I'm a first-year MBA student at Cornell's Johnson Graduate School of Management. I'll be moderating today's session on sales for tech startups, strategies for growing a successful sales team for tech startups. Today's webinar is hosted by the Cornell Johnson Entrepreneurship Club and Johnson AA&D, and will focus on how to scale your biotech, software, STEM, or physical product company with best practices for establishing an institutional sales process for your innovation. In addition, we will discuss when and how to scale up your sales team and how to set them up for success. Looking at an overview for today's event, if we can turn to the next slide, please. We will spend the next few minutes discussing some key housekeeping items. We'll then move into a moderated discussion with our esteemed panelists who have joined us here today, and we'll then wrap up with some Q&A from the audience. So for housekeeping, the first thing to note is that a link to this recording will be available right here on this page following the event. Next, let's discuss some Q&A functionality. For the conversation, I will be asking the panel a series of pre-prepared questions. As I present and as the group engages in conversation, please type any questions that you have into the upper right of your screen. If you're in full screen mode, you will need to exit full screen mode in order to see the chat icon. If your question was for a specific panelist, please note so in your question. That Q&A session, which I mentioned in the keynote agenda, will take place during the last 10 minutes of our conversation. Now, without further ado, let's meet today's panelists, Amy Cheney, Tim Krozek, and Mark Kostov. Amy, Tim, and Mark, thank you so much for joining us here today, and super excited to hear all of your perspectives and engage in this conversation with you. Would you each mind taking a brief moment to introduce yourselves? Amy, we could start with you and then head over to Tim and Mark.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Adam. As Adam mentioned, Amy Cheney. I'm SVP of Strategic Accounts at Dataminr. For those of you who might be familiar with Dataminr, we're a late-stage small company. We were a startup over the last few years when I joined. If you Google us, we actually yesterday just raised a really exciting Series F. So been part of building a go-to-market organization, and very excited to be kind of part of the team that is getting ready for IPO. Other background about myself, I got my MBA at Cornell Johnson, and I am a frequent guest speaker at Cornell Tech, where I focus on sales for startups. And also recently an entrepreneur in residence as part of the Center for Economic Development, which is part of Cornell University as well, focuses on startups with a particular specialty in sales. A little bit else about me, I'm a professional coach, certified in professional coaching, which I do a lot with sales, my sales team at Dataminr. And I also am a mom of 2 toddlers. So that's my first and number one job. So thanks for having me.
Tim, you want to go next?
Hi, I'm Tim Krozek, and I too am a Johnson School graduate of 2001. I spent the first half of my career at companies like ADP, Netscape, Yahoo, and AOL, but the second half of my professional life has been deeply in early stage startups, either angel funded companies, B companies building out global sales, as well as BD, customer success, and marketing teams. I'm currently the CRO of a company called Upwave, but I have started a company before, as well as been CEO of another company called Boost Media. Most of my background is in software, media, and ad tech, and I'm happy to be here. And Adam, you're doing a great job so far.
Thank you, Tim. Mark?
Thanks, Adam. Hi, everybody. Mark Kostov, it's a pleasure to be here today. I got my MBA at the University of Toronto, Rotman School of Management. I hope that won't be held against me here, but I'm very, very honored to be here with Tim and Amy to have this discussion today. I have a background in biochemistry. Thought I'd go into the medical field, but got the entrepreneurial bug while I was in undergraduate. Ended up working as an entrepreneur for many years, and then ended up doing my MBA, where I had my kind of light bulb moment of science plus business is the healthcare industry. Been in health technology ever since. A background, I've worked in medical devices. I tried to start my own biotechnology company, and that was a fun ride that I'm happy to chat about today if we get the chance. I've worked in health insurance, and currently I work in the pharmaceutical space. So I work at a company called BenchSci. When I joined the company, I grew the sales team by 100%. I've been there just under 4 years now, but like my panelist colleagues will I'm sure confirm, time in a startup is totally warped. It feels a lot more like dog years than regular years. So it's been great. Excited to be here and kind of share my perspective on sales. I've always been in startups my whole career. It is a bit of a different beast from maybe larger organizations, not necessarily better or worse, just different. So I'm happy to share more throughout the panel.
Cool. Thank you so much, everyone. It's super interesting to hear about everyone from different industries and different experiences at their respective startups. So I think this is a great launching point for the first question. And as you guys all were saying, you've all been around tech startups for quite a while now. We have a number of founders and aspiring founders from the Cornell community on the webinar today. So the first question I'd like to ask are, what are some of the biggest misconceptions that you have found that technical founders have about the sales process? And any one of you, feel free to take this first question, and feel free to respond to one another as the conversation progresses.
Yeah, I can jump in. So I think, so I've worked with technical founders over the last 18 years. And one of the common threads of my experience in working with people who are very technical is they underestimate how complicated it is, the technology that they've created, not just in what it means to educate internally on how to explain what the Mousetrap does, but also partnering with sales leaders or sellers in how to explain that to a customer. So there's sort of a two-step process, which is, can you get your internal team to understand the value proposition for the Mousetrap you've built, and then how do you create content and a story in order to explain that same thing out to a very, very broad market, especially when, for the most part, when you're talking about entrepreneurial endeavors, this is a new thing. You've created either a new category or you've significantly iterated off of something that already exists, and you've got to be able to explain why it's different. And I think for the common thread is how complicated the product is, or how complicated the service is, and translating that into sort of the person on the street kind of language.
Yeah, and I think to add to that, as I've advised startup founders, particularly technical startup founders, there's a tendency to not realize at the beginning that they are likely to be the first salesperson of the company. And they kind of think of sales as sort of something maybe I'll hire somebody for, or kind of put it into the marketing bucket, which they're actually two different things that tie very closely together. But the reality is, from a funding standpoint, they may not be able to afford sales at the very beginning. And so they're going to have to do LinkedIn outreach to people who've never heard of them before. They're going to have a meeting that they've hopefully gotten to discuss more about their company. And there's often this misconception that they're going to show up and just say everything about their product and it'll kind of just resonate. And what I found is that a lot of people, just the word sales has kind of sometimes a negative connotation, and they think it's sort of pushy or overly aggressive, trying to get you to buy something you don't actually want. But what I found in my career is that the best salespeople, especially in technology solution sales, are more consultative, and it's always about the other person across from you or the company that you're meeting with and asking questions and coming from a place of understanding. And what's so great about a founder is nobody understands that market and what they're doing better than that person. So they can actually be a really, really great salesperson at the beginning, as long as they don't, we have a term, don't show up and throw up, where you just sort of say everything that you do. It's about understanding the person across from you. And that's really the key to sales that I think is a big misconception.
I just want to echo, I completely agree with that sentiment, Amy, and Tim as well. But I do think a lot of the time sales just has a bad rap. Like, a lot of people think it is convincing people of something that is untrue. I'm a big believer in the adage, you don't sell to people, you help people buy. You help them buy a quality product or service. And that, along with, in tech sales, I find you just kind of have to, you're selling a bit into the future. And it's about finding that perfect amount into the future that is still interesting but attainable. And I think a lot of technical founders maybe don't appreciate that there's a lot of storytelling that goes into that. Like, finding a way to tell that right story about why this product or service, why now, why that company. A lot of that kind of gets brushed over. And to Amy's point, it's not about just showing up and saying, here's a laundry list of things that's better about our mousetrap, but really understanding that customer's business and showing you have that empathy. There is a craft to that, and that needs to be honed.
Cool. And I think for this next question, Amy, you alluded to this a bit with LinkedIn in your answer, but curious, maybe anything else that you've seen, like any techniques that you've witnessed throughout any of your careers, any techniques that founding teams have done successfully to get that first sale. And as part of a two-part question, any advice for founders who have to figure out how to ask for someone's business? And as per last question, anyone feel free to start and take it away.
So I'll start by answering the first thing you mentioned around LinkedIn outreach. I'm asked about this a lot, is how do you just get somebody to meet with you? It's a pretty basic thing that I think everybody in business sort of struggles with. It continues to be one of the challenges, particularly in the environment we're in now, when everybody is at home and phone numbers may have changed and things like that. One of the techniques I see, LinkedIn is a great tool, but it's about kind of creating a message that resonates. Again, it's the same idea of empathy that Mark mentioned, is what is it that's going to get the person's attention? And it's often around, I've been helping others like you in your role in your company to solve this problem. And you're making a hypothesis that they'll have that problem, and you keep it very short and very sweet, and that's going to get somebody's attention. And then you have to send a whole lot of them and make a lot of calls and do it. And I think a lot of people struggle with, they rejected me, but you might have to make 100 of those and then get a small percentage that write you back. And so it really is an activity in sort of focus and numbers, because let's be honest, like, do you reply to all your emails? Even if it sounds interesting, I don't. So that's kind of the first thing on the prospecting side. In terms of, ways that help in getting a sale, I'm a big believer in preparation for every single meeting, particularly for the type of sales that I do, which I think most tech companies aspire to, is strategic selling, where we sell large multi-figure deals into enterprises. So my team is selling, the Fortune 1000 firms, but we also sell kind of mid-level firms. Every meeting, we actually discuss what is it that we want to get out of this meeting. And if you're bringing multiple people, is understanding what roles people play in that. And then a third piece of that is making sure you've met with multiple stakeholders, at an organization, to make sure that, you're getting buy-in from multiple people, depending again on where you are in the phase and the stage of your company. But I think preparation for a meeting is very, very important in order to get the sale. I might, because I've made a lot of comments, I might pass to my colleagues that big question around how do you get over that hump of asking for business. I have a lot of thoughts, but I've talked for a while, so I'll let you guys jump in.
So I'll answer the second question that Amy offered up. for us to partner with her on answering the larger question. But I'll tell you the way that in all of the successful companies, startup companies, and again, I'm really been early stage. I'm seed A, B, into the C round. Is the answer is give it away for free. First customers we've had, and I'll give you an example. I was at a company called Efficient Frontier. It was later acquired by Adobe for $500 million. Our first customer was eBay, and we were in paid search. We were helping paid search marketers understand how they could optimize paid search spend. Now it's a category. It's called search engine marketing. But at the time, we were the only company that had an algorithmic solution to this large challenge that was happening as Google was evolving. And so we went after the largest paid search marketer at the time was eBay. And we gave it away for free. And it was a multi-million-dollar kind of customer that we should have charged for, but we knew we needed to learn from the most sophisticated customer in the market. And so for the first 2 years, we partnered with them. They help us in exchange for giving away for free is we developed the product around their best practices. And we really use them as a cornerstone, actually sort of built our company. We had our initial sales pitch was explaining how our algorithm worked. And the second slide was, oh, by the way, we do eBay's paid search spend. And because of that, everybody would take a meeting with us because everybody knew that eBay was at the time a large paid search marketer. We have that same situation now at Upwave. Not now, we now charge to one of our larger customers, which is Clorox, but we initially engaged them by partnering with them to meet their needs. That's been very effective. I know it's unconventional and everybody, sort of wants that first dollar coming in the door, but finding a big customer that is willing to partner with you and teach you about, what their needs are, and you develop product around a key customer or two, I think is quite effective.
In the interest of time, I won't add on too much, but again, I could not agree more with both points from Amy and Tim, but especially on that first sale, it's a lot more business development than it is sales at the beginning. Like you're creating, and honesty, in my opinion, is the way to go. Like they know you're a small company, you have no brand, you have no resources. What you might have is a great new technology, hopefully, that can help them. But they're going to know that, whether they're telling you that or not. So honesty and creating that relationship where they're willing to give you feedback is invaluable, right? That early stage feedback. And if you can find a top 1 or 2 player in your space, like in Tim's example, eBay, that is a credibility builder with everybody that you can't even pay for. Like that you couldn't pay enough to then say, hey, eBay is a customer and this is all the value they're getting out of it. So it's not about, Tim says give it away for free. That's dollars, but there's definitely value you're getting from that that can then let you go and actually ask for real dollars from other customers in the second and third and fourth kind of deal. So very beginning, it really is a lot more like BD work than traditional sales.
Great. So we talked then, it was great to hear everyone's perspective on that and talking about some of the techniques. And I'd like to pivot the conversation then to the actual sales process. And Mark, would love to start with you on this one. What are some of the things that a founding team should be keeping an eye out for when designing the sales part of the business model? And as a 2-part question, how do you tell what type of sales process that you're working with and what it is that your startup is building and developing?
For sure. Thanks, Adam. First and foremost, simplify. It's really easy to really quickly make a super over-engineered 12-step process that has multiple cadences within each component and gates, and less is more in everything, email writing, outreach, but also your own internal process. The other piece I would say is there's 2 processes that you have to worry about, both the internal one of what, this is our cadence of, demo meeting and then intro and then this. And then there's the external process, what does it actually look like for the customer in terms of how you walk them through how they buy or evaluate your product and service. So both of them should need to be data-driven. You should measure everything and capture that information and iterate over time. The initial process is going to be terrible compared to the 10th and 12th iterations and so on and so forth. So capture all that data, use data again, on both sides, internally and externally, in how you guide your customer through it. And to me, it really comes down to kind of at least our approach and how I've learned to do it, it's 3 steps. It's who are you, and making sure you can communicate who you are. What do you do? That the problem you're doing is actually worth solving in the market. And then credibly, can you solve it better than other people? Like, why is your technology the better one? 1 and 3, actually, 2 is really the hardest part, because especially you're selling to people who are too busy and they always have too much going on, and really you're just trying to get ranked as a higher priority on their list. So what can you do to credibly say that this is a problem worth solving and worth giving attention to? And to Amy's point earlier, last thing I'll say on the subject, you're not meeting them for the first time and trying to get them to, hand over money for the solution. You're trying to sell the next meeting, the next encounter. So don't try to show up and throw up, as she said, all of the information about everything in that one go. The first meeting is about intrigue and connecting and discovery and learning. And then the next meeting is about bringing in more stakeholders. And, again, that process unfolds over time as you learn who else needs to be involved and what, timeline and et cetera, et cetera. But I'd say more than anything, be ruthlessly pragmatic and iterate on whatever process you start with.
That's great, Mark. And I guess this just reminds me of a story. When I first joined Dataminr, I actually we were just really getting into the corporate space. We were just starting to sell corporations. We were actually quite successful in the public sector, but hadn't really sold a lot yet to corporations. And I was hired really to come in and figure out how to sell Dataminr at scale to a corporation. And so one of the things I think is so important, and particularly because there's so much ambiguity, there's such a huge amount to go after, is to create a clear sales strategy. And so one of the things that we did is we picked a few industries. I think we picked three to five industries. We were very clear about it. We did some research on what would be best aligned to our company. It doesn't mean we couldn't go after others, but we felt that those were ones we could focus in. One of the reasons an industry strategy works well is then once you learn from these conversations that Mark was talking about, you're not going to go sell them day one. In fact, we actually gave out free trials, like Tim said, for a while. We started testing it. Is that then you can learn from the industry and you start to have referrals. You can start to say, oh, do you know so-and-so over here? And they often know each other or move across different industries. And then we actually picked specific role types within the organization that we were going to target. So I think we picked 3 or 4 of them. We tried to go at the C-suite, but we also had several kind of at the mid-level. And then what's great about that is then we were able to create a message. We were able to decide how are we going to solve the problem for this role within this type of company within this sector. And then, we were able to have that clear process now where you could then say to a group of salespeople, this is your pitch, this is who you're going to go after, this is what we want you to say, and let's try it. And then we made some mistakes. Then we came back and said, actually, that one didn't work or whatever. But that having that strategy right at the beginning helps you track your progress and helps you get more focused so that if you do have success, you can replicate it over and over again.
Yeah, I'll be a little bit repetitive on what Amy's saying, but maybe use some different words. So I think you've got to define what kind of sale you have. Is it an enterprise sale? Is it a tactical transactional sale? Is this phone sales? Is this in person, or these days is it a Zoom sale? Understanding how many meetings you have to have, stakeholders that need to be involved in the process. Maybe it's a channel sale. Maybe you're only selling through partners. But for the most part, I've been involved in enterprise sales where there's a lot of steps. And so what we spend a lot of time on initially, and then again, as Amy's mentioned, you refine, is understanding what's your average sales cycle? Is it 80 days? Is it 90 days? How many meetings you have to have? And then what's happening at each stage, who's involved at each stage at the customer, and what is the information that they need to know to earn the right to move to that next stage in the sales cycle, and partner with your sales team, or if you're just selling on your own because you're, the founder and you're doing the sales, what you have to ensure that the customer or the prospect knows it has that information to move to that next stage. Because if you skip something and they don't have some information about your product and you're trying to move them along, you can ensure that they'll churn out in 2 weeks or in 2 months after they become a customer, because they didn't understand something along the way. And that 90 days or 80 days or 30 days, however long it takes to close a customer, it's vitally important, not just so you get somebody to sign a contract, a piece of paper, but so that they're a customer a year or 2 years from now. And what we always find out, I don't want to say always, but a lot of times we find out when customers are unhappy 3 months in, it's because we skipped a step. The customer didn't really deeply understand something about our product during the sales cycle. And I think in order to deeply understand customer behavior and why customers are happy or churn out, you've got to go back and really do serious detective work during the sales cycle to understand what happened. What happened during the sales cycle to make them happy? What happened during the sales cycle to make them unhappy 3 months later?
Just, Tim, you made me realize, I think a lot of what we're talking about is enterprise sales, and again, this is a general, rule, but there's exceptions to everyone. But the smaller the deal volume, usually the more transactional, right? It's just about volume, get in front of enough people, get enough proposals out, and you'll win enough. The more complex and large the deal cycle the deal itself, just the more complicated, the bigger the deal size, the more it is a more solution consultative sales. So just understanding where you fit in that spectrum will inherently kind of change your strategy and your approach to build the right process and then team around the activity that will lead to the right results. And, I often think, in sales, this is a pretty commonly known thing. Best answer is yes. Second best answer is no. And the worst answer possible is a slow maybe, right? And so finding ways to get to yes or no quickly is really, really valuable. Wasting, 3, 4, 5 months, and again, if it's on the enterprise side, a year, going after a customer that ultimately is going to say no because it doesn't fit their budget. There's a million reasons, but it's really, really detrimental because of that opportunity cost. So building into a process what you have to do to really get to that next stage or a no, and again, iterating on that, recognizing where you fit into that spectrum is really valuable.
Yeah, I'll echo what Mark is saying and use the words that I use internally that we use. Is your number one job is to sell something. Your number two job is to qualify out as fast as you can.
Great. It was really interesting, hearing about the technique and the process of the sales cycle. Would like to transition the conversation a bit now to the sales team. And Tim, I think this would be a great question for you to start us off with, given your experience working at different startups at different stages of financing. So curious, how do you transition from being a small startup to building a sales team and a sales process as your company grows?
Yeah. So thanks for asking me to kick off. I think so. A couple things. I'll start even a little earlier stage. So we're our company now. We're a Y Combinator. We came out of Y Combinator, and one of their philosophies around this kind of does touch back even on the very first question that you proposed is you sort of the founders don't earn the right to hire a sales team until they've done everything in the company themselves, and they do it all manually. So you don't start writing a line of code. You don't start hiring salespeople until you've done everything manually yourself. So first off, I think it is imperative for founders to understand customers at a deep and prospects at a deep level, and do it in a very sort of painful manual process before you sort of start building a company. So for once you get sort of past that, it's time to start building process. Once you have that ideal customer, once you understand what your value proposition is and what that how your product does fit in strategically with your customer base, for me, what I'm generally have been brought in the past is sort of building the machine. Is after it's been when I've been a CRO, which is what I am now, is once you've identified these characteristics of your customer, is setting up the machine around do you need SDRs? And again, I've as Mark talked about, we're talking a lot about enterprise sales. Do you need SDRs? Do you have a lot of inbound leads? Do you have a lot of outbound, or do you need a lot of outbound effort? What kind of investment are you willing to make into different technologies in order to build top of funnel interest in the product, and deeply understanding what is needed at each stage in the funnel in order to create happy customers. So I'll kick it over to Mark and Amy.
One thing, thanks, Tim. I think Tim actually might be the rarity here in that it is rare to find a person who might actually be the right person to go from 0 to $100 million plus. I find often it is somewhat of a different skill set to go from 0 to 2 million in revenue. 2 to 10 is kind of another really important bucket. And then 10 plus is kind of that and you're off to the races, so to speak. It's okay if that is the case. It's okay if your initial hire is someone who is more willing to, because the beginning is a lot of hustle. It really is. It's like someone who just is really great at hearing no and then showing up again and, continuing to ask and persist. Those people aren't always the same people that have a ton of experience at building out huge sales team or managing a 20 plus person sales organization. They can be, and they can learn on the job. That is also possible. But I think just good, honest discussion, more than anything, that founder, that CEO, that founding team and the CEO need to have a healthy relationship with the sales leader in terms of their expectations and what they want of them. And you want no one to ever get blindsided, but it does happen. It happens that the person who was the right fit to get you to those first, few key deals isn't necessarily the right person to take you into your B round and beyond and into the, tens of millions in sales. So I think just good open communication is a really key piece. And to Tim's point, if the founding team has that knowledge that they should have of going through that grind themselves, I think then, you can always tell the difference between, CEOs and founders that have done sales and appreciate the grind of it versus ones that are, to have some of those misperceptions, which is, just go out there and get people to buy it. It's there is a fundamental difference between those types of founders in startups versus the other.
I think I can add on a little bit here where in talking about seeing a company change so much over a few year period and who we've hired and what has worked. And so when we first really got started at Dataminr, some of the first key people who were going out and kind of landing some of those initial sales were exactly what you talked about. Very scrappy, not afraid to just kind of find an opportunity, not afraid to bend rules and figure it out and come and ask for a pricing difference and all these things. Just very entrepreneurial people. Sometimes, actually, one person didn't even have a sales background. They really understood the customer and kind of went in a consultative way and worked really closely with our CEO. As we grew quickly, we had to put more and more processes in place. And sometimes we found some of those early entrepreneurial type people actually don't like a very process-oriented environment and found they'd get more bored and weren't having as much fun anymore. And so you start to hire people with more institutional knowledge around kind of sales and process. But what was interesting in sort of that mid stage, we found some of the more institutional sales, we hire people from maybe bigger companies with tremendous backgrounds, really great resumes, actually really struggled in the somewhat still ambiguous environment where things were not as structured. We didn't have completely a marketing package with full messaging to just go out and train them and sell. And some of those people actually didn't like that either. And so that as we saw sort of that middle stage, that was a little bit of a challenge of finding people who understood how to sell in a structured environment, but who still had that entrepreneurial hat and wanted to be part of that. And then now as we're scaling, I'm finding it's a really different story, even within a year or two, because, we have so much more training and marketing. Now we are hiring people who have tremendous, big company experience, who are ready to go out and sell at big company sales. So it's been really interesting to watch that evolve as we go from small to big. And there are, in fact, different types of salespeople who fit into different parts of the startup stages.
Just to build a little bit on that, I think, the pandemic has, for all of us in every way, shape, and form, changed everything. But in startup land especially, it's hard to teach people to be good at dealing with ambiguity. That is something that some people just have or are comfortable with. It is not to say any skill can't be fostered and learned and developed, but there is a bit of an innate, trait in individuals that are okay in a ambiguous environment. That's hard to teach. It's just something that and I think I'm kind of getting ahead of one of the questions coming up, which is about sales hiring. But figuring out and asking which people are finding out the right questions to ask of people that are okay in that uncertainty and okay at figuring it out, or even like it, to Amy's point. Some people enjoy that environment and like having a little bit more autonomy and creativity element to the sale and to their job, versus others who really like a very well-defined process and can follow it to a T. Usually in startups, until you reach that true, either small company or true scale-up phase, it's constantly dynamic. The nature of a startup is all about growth, and growth comes with change and learning constantly. So understanding and being, again, honest with the people who are doing those sales that, hey, you're not always going to have perfect information, or are you okay figuring out these pieces? And, again, keeping good lines of communication open between you, the sales leader, and your team are fundamental to allowing your team to thrive in that environment.
Yeah, we do a lot of interviewing for candidates, and a big characteristic that we screen for is, especially with earlier stage companies, is this concept of the ability to be successful and excel in an ambiguous environment. So when you see sort of a ball of yarn in front of you, does that give you energy and does that make you excited? Or does that when you see that, does that make you frustrated and want to sort of quit for the day? And either answer is okay. It's personality driven. I think it is sort of just who you are. But some people, in order to be successful, they need structure. They need swim lanes. They need tight swim lanes. They need to be given very clear instructions on what to do. Some people actually would see that, so swim lanes, as Mark was talking about, and say, that sounds like a nightmare because I don't have the freedom to explore and, learn different things. And these people are different. These sellers are different at different stages. You need the person who gets energized through complication, earlier stage, and then maybe where Amy's company is moving now is you need, as you're scaling a sales team, you need people who, because especially as the company gets bigger, you've got to stay on script, because you can't pull an engineering team off of a project because somebody sold something that was a little out of or not in line with the roadmap. You've got to get people who sellers who really do excel in staying within tight swim lanes, the larger the company.
Yeah, so I think this is a perfect transition to the next question. We talked about building the team and now want to focus on identifying the sales team. So, anyone could start on this one. What are the misconceptions about who are great fits in the hiring process, and what does a fit look like?
I'm happy to kick it off here. I think Amy actually already gave a really good indication towards why this is a big challenge. I think we all use the past as an attempt to predict future behavior, right? It's a model. I love the adage, all models are broken, some are useful. Some experience is helpful in, the industry and institutional knowledge, but it isn't always a predictor of future success. To me, the number one, again, I'm using my startup kind of lens to answer this question, but the number one thing you want to look for in a sales hire, above all else, is that they personally jive with the mission or the product or service, that they have some sort of personal stake in wanting to solve this problem in the world. There's easier ways to make money, truthfully, and startup, again, the rewards can be great. The risk is also high. That's why that works. But finding people who are passionate, legitimately passionate about this problem at this time in the world and trying to solve it is really, really fundamental, I think, to people kind of dealing with that muck or that grind that is, startup sales and helping a company, really grow really, really quickly. And so definitely factoring in things like experience and what you've done and why and background, but really kind of, I think, trying to get to the meat of, do you really care about this company in this time is kind of, to me, the number one important question to answer.
I completely agree. I think that passion and that understanding of what you're trying to solve for is so important. And, obviously resumes, we all look at resumes and backgrounds and things like that. But I've also seen several instances where somebody who has very little experience, but has the passion and the drive and is willing to dig their teeth in, especially if you need someone to make a lot of cold outreach and go try different things, that sometimes somebody with less experience can be a really great starting point. To give you an example, prior to Dataminer, I worked at Bloomberg for a number of years, and I was part of launching a couple businesses there. And those businesses, even though Bloomberg was a big company, they were really small, and we didn't have a lot of money. And so we hired some very, inexperienced people right out of school, and they had passion, they had drive, they had goals, they understood what we were doing, and they're really excited. And one or two of them actually ended up being our top salespeople at the end after a couple of years, more so than people we had hired with a lot of experience. And so I have always felt it's good to be really open-minded about cultural fits and understanding about, aligning with the mission, like Mark said. I think it's a really important point, especially for a founder, because you want to make sure people are really in it and right there with you.
Yeah, I would say echo what Mark and Amy are saying around passion and alignment with the mission of either the business unit or the company. All that's the most important thing. The other thing I would say is I think is a tendency to go too big, too quick, meaning hire a VP of sales or a CRO when you're an A company. And if you hire somebody who's not the right, whose skill set is not aligned with the stage of the company. So a CRO, maybe the role is to scale and to build out infrastructure and technology, and they're going to go spend a lot of money. They're going to spend a lot of money on people. They're going to spend a lot of money on products. They're going to spend money on process. They're going to want to spend money on operational efficiencies, and that's also more money. And a Series A company might not have that. Maybe you only raised $10 million. So hiring the right person at the right time really, really matters, and not going too big too fast. And we've seen that. I've seen that with people hiring sales leadership that's sort of too big too early. Marketing leaders that are too big too early. So really aligning and understanding what your stage is, what your cash burn is, and how much money can you afford. Because the worst thing you can do is hire what you think is somebody who's going to come in and sell, and they're like, no, my job's not to sell. My job is to hire a bunch of people and they go sell and they're going to build the infrastructure. And all of a sudden it's like, wait a minute, my cash burn, which was, I was comfortable at 150 or 500 grand a month. Now he just talked about burning, increasing my cash burn up to $1 million a month. Wait, we can't do that. And then all of a sudden you've got a huge misalignment. So really understanding the stage of your company and who you're hiring and make sure that that skill set is aligned with where you are.
Just to build on what Tim's saying, I've seen that happen where it is super important on the leadership side. But just putting my MBA hat on for a moment and assuming some people in the audience might be actually from the MBA program, I think there's also a bit of at least this is my experience and what I remember when I was a student, sales is not really actually highlighted as a really strong career path coming out of an MBA. A lot of people are usually taking on a lot of debt to go to school. A lot of sales roles are only part base salary and a lot of, variable compensation. And it's scary. It's scary to be like, well, I'm only going to earn, $50, $60, $70, $80,000 a year. And I just have all this debt and I want to make as much money as possible. And that risk feels like a lot. It feels like a lot to take on where, some of the more traditional high paying jobs like consulting or banking or other forms, feel like more of a guarantee. I want to earn that 6-figure salary out the gate. I would push back on that and say that MBAs actually make really great salespeople, especially on that enterprise sales side of the coin, because you have to understand your customer's business. Nowadays, especially, you have to be able to break down their business and what's happening in the market. And MBAs are really well suited to do exactly that. And it is a lot more solution selling, consultative selling. And so finding people who actually see the dots and like connecting them and want to partake in helping their customers solve really interesting, challenging problems with your technology or service can be hugely impactful. And again, my bias here, you can make a ton of money. It's a great opportunity to be very well off. Again, it requires the work, but no job that pays you a lot of money doesn't require a lot of effort and work. And so I would highly encourage, more MBAs to consider sales as a vocation, because if you find the right fit, again, factoring in all the stuff we've been talking about, if you find the right company that you believe in what they're trying to do in the world, it could be a really, really, great opportunity.
Not to mention that there are a lot of recruiters right now in tech sales, and especially in this economic environment, it's a very sticky position. So just a plug there as well.
Great. Thank you so much for that. It was great insight. Interesting to learn about the hiring process for startups within sales. This is just going to be the last question before we head into the audience Q&A. And we're going to turn to managing the sales team, especially with the interactions of the sales team with the rest of the company. And the question I have here are what are some of the best practices in terms of managing the sales process and reporting to the rest of the company, and how involved should other parts of the company be in the sales process as the sales team continues to grow? And anyone, feel free to lead us off with this question.
I can lead that. So it's hugely important for other aspects of the business to be involved in the managing and reporting of sales. So especially as processes get going, there's a real emphasis on something called a pipeline. A pipeline is simply the sales that are in progress throughout different stages that are getting closer to a sale. And really the entire management team pays attention to that pipeline because it is a predictor of how much revenue the company is going to make. So what's neat about sales is it's a truly impacting the bottom line. It is the essence of it. In terms of kind of how to manage that, we've put a lot of different processes in place, standardizations around what stage are you at in your pipeline, or sometimes it's referred to as a funnel. And I think Tim talked about it earlier as well, is making sure everybody's very clear on those stages stages. And we involve our marketing team in those. We actually have a call per different business unit, because often marketing can help influence different stages of a sale, whether it's through an email nurture campaign or doing things on LinkedIn or perhaps an event. They can actually really impact the stages of sales. We include our sales operations teams. We include sometimes people from our CFOs. So it really is a company effort getting around the reporting of sales. And then it's really coaching. So we do a lot of time one-on-one with our reps to make sure that we're with them along the way. It's not just the sales rep out there by themselves, but that the manager leaders are helping in that process, because as we talked about, it's so important for founders and the CEO to be involved in some of the sales. It's not going to happen with just one person. It really is a team effort getting a sale over the line. And the big ones, we usually have like 20 people we have to thank. And it's often goes all the way from product. The product team, hugely important. They're usually in our meetings. So it's always a team effort. So back to your original question, that sales pipeline management and making sure it's a team support really creates a culture of getting every deal over the line.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with what Amy said. And to piggyback on that a bit is we have a philosophy that, yes, a lot of people need to be involved, but a lot of people need to be involved not just so the company can get better and the product team can learn more about what the customer needs are and how the product is being received in the marketplace. But I think there's also a tendency, if you don't have everybody involved, there's a tendency to sort of point to sellers and say, well, the reason that we're not being successful, the reason that sale didn't happen is because of that sales person or the sales team. And that's rarely the case. It is usually there's something deeper going on, which is, the messaging is wrong. Well, why is the messaging wrong? Well, like we need to involve marketing more, or maybe the product market fit isn't quite right. Well, that's not a sales challenge. That's a product challenge. So really having everybody involved, so to really understand if something's not clicking, what is it that's not clicking? So everybody can participate in the sale. So everybody gets better. And we have a philosophy that everybody sort of needs to sort of feel the pain. So you got to feel the pain of a loss of a customer, the loss of a sale. And if you're not involved, you don't feel that pain. You go home, you go to sleep. The salesperson is a person who doesn't go home and goes to sleep because they lost the sale. Everybody needs to sort of be in the boat and feel the pain together.
Great. So I can move now into some audience Q&A. So the first question I have here, and anyone feel free to take it away, is from Andre. And the question is, what would you say is the first step a new startup should do in the direction of sales before the startup has enough funds for a sales team?
I think I'll actually just parrot back one of the answers that Amy provided earlier, which is sit down and focus and figure out where you're going to spend your energy. Often with a new technology, like one of the hardest parts, and salespeople are typically bad at this. We all like shiny things. So it's like, you want to try that or go there or say this. Figure out where you're going to play, because as a startup, you have limited resources. To your point, you haven't even raised your first round yet. And you can't just run around amok trying to sell to anyone and everyone. Figure out what industry is a really good place to start. But even within that, who within that industry, without your product or service, their life just isn't as good, right? They're either wasting time or energy or money, or hopefully some mix of all three. And go at them with everything you got. And then if they're not the right person, figure out who is, because really focusing your efforts with the limited resources you have are going to be the difference between that, early survival and that early product market fit alignment to let you raise that first round and start building out the team or not.
Yeah, I was part of a Sequoia funded company for a number of years, and they challenged us constantly in board meetings with, are we 10 times better than the competitive set? And if you're not 10 times better, people won't, there's no reason to go change from product A to product B. You have to be 10 times better. So before you hire a seller, before you even start getting into market, whatever you're building, whether it's technology, whatever you're doing, it better be 10 times better than whatever the incumbent solution is.
Great. So why don't we move on to the next question from the audience? And this is from Anum. The question is, what advice do you have for anyone moving into the role to manage and grow sales, and what best practices can you share?
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say a little bit what I said earlier, which is it's understanding the product market fit, understanding your customer, and then understanding the type of sale that you've got, which Mark touched on earlier, which is it a transactional sale? Is it an enterprise sale? Is this a sale that, you know, you're gonna grow through partnerships or integrations? So I think that for me is the most important thing, is understanding what you've got and understanding how to sell it and how to go to market with it. And out of that deep understanding is then you understand who to hire and how do you marry up the strategy with the people that you're going to hire.
The other thing I'd add to answering the question around being a manager of sales, I do think being a sales manager is a very different job than being a salesperson. They are very clear and distinct activities. And as a sales manager, I spend a lot of time on the more internal relationship with the people in the team, making sure they're supported, often getting involved to help, if they need a resource or they need something internally asked for, kind of that type of internal piece, versus the sales part, which is going out on meetings, really, the things Tim talked about is understanding the product and how you're solving problems and really understanding the sale itself. I do think it is wise for any sales manager to be able to sell the product themselves. But as a manager, a lot of time is taken away from that activity to doing other things. And so that's always that balancing act. I always kind of try to take a moment and say, hey, I need to go on some sales meetings and get back out there in the field and go with people on the meetings. Sometimes I'll do them myself, and just to I always learn something that was missing from the process that as a manager, I can bring back and support the team and what they need.
Great. And I want to wrap up with this question. Apologies if I was not able to get to your question to the audience, but just to wrap things up, and I'd like if everyone could answer this one. What are the key takeaways, would you say, just from all we've spoken about today for the audience that's joining us?
Simple question for the end there, Adam. There's a lot. I think, to me, one of the biggest things, again, every startup is a snowflake. There's certain things you can pull on in terms of best practices and whatnot, but the nature of your business, Tim said it earlier, is it's unlike anything that hopefully exists in the market. This is a net new thing, technology. It's going to require a unique approach. Be ruthlessly pragmatic. To me, it's like, be iterative, listen to your customers. That is the number one. Like, hear what they're saying. Don't just try to force your solution. Don't be a solution looking for a problem to solve, right? Understand your customers' problems. Make sure your solution is actually helping. Again, whether it's a product or service, and iterate quickly. The number one thing a startup has over any other company with resources is the ability to move fast, right? You don't have layers of bureaucracy and so many, people to coordinate. Use that advantage. It is your number one and potentially only advantage, is to iterate quickly and develop, something that is really valuable in the market as fast as you can.
Yeah, I'll do three things. One, couple are takeaways, and probably one is a new concept. But the takeaways is, I think the most important thing, especially about hiring early sellers and early sales leadership, is this concept of passion. Like, people better really be all in and be deeply, deeply interested and attached to what the company mission is. Because the second point is you're going to make lots and lots and lots of mistakes, and it's going to be infuriating and frustrating. And you've got to have a group of people, whether it's salespeople or anybody cross-functionally, that's passionately involved in solving the problem. So passion, get used to lots and lots of mistakes and lots of sleepless nights. And then the last thing, just to piggyback on what Mark said, is but just keep moving as fast as you can, iterate and move fast after you make these mistakes.
So I believe that any startup founder can be the best salesperson for the company because of the passion that's behind that. And I think it's so important to think about it, cross out the word sales and think about it as solving problems. Especially in tech, you're there to solve a problem. And then that gets that sort of anxiousness about feeling too aggressive or not knowing how to run the meeting kind of out of your mind. And you're there as a person to another person, understanding, listening, being empathetic, and solving problems, because chances are the reason you got into this is because you're really excited about it and it's something you believe in. And that, I believe, really comes across. And if you go from a place of, I'm here to help you with something, you're much, much closer to getting a sale. There's obviously a lot of things that happen around that, but challenge yourself to put that hat on, and because it's such an important part of launching a business.
Awesome. Thank you so much, all of you, for those wise parting words. And as we wrap up today's session, I want to thank all of you, Amy, Tim, and Mark. This was such an engaging conversation, and really appreciate hearing all of your insight. As noted for the audience earlier, a link to this recording will be available right here on this page after the event. And if interested, the eLab will be hosting another webinar on startup tools for managing customer relationships with HubSpot. And that will be taking place on Thursday, April 8th at noon Eastern time. If we could just move on to our final slide. If you are interested in learning more about entrepreneurship and startups in general, please email us at entrepreneurs_in_residence@cornell.edu. And thanks again, Amy, Tim, and Mark, and for everyone who joined us here today. And please enjoy the rest of your day. And thanks again.